In the shadows of a towering fern, a pair of eyes, sharp and intelligent, locks onto a target. This is not a mammal. It is a nightmare of feathers and fury, a terror bird standing 8 feet tall. Its beak, curved like a butcher's hook, is designed for one thing: to sever the spinal cords of its prey with surgical precision. A few yards away, a heavy, hoofed beast, an Astrapotheres, grazes unsuspectingly. It is a peaceful giant, a relic of a time when mammals were experimenting with size. But in this jungle, peace is a fatal weakness. With an explosion of speed that defies physics for a creature its size, the bird charges. The ground shakes. The mammal turns, eyes widening in primal panic, but the reaction time of a herbivore is no match for the calculated brutality of an apex predator. The strike is instant, violent. The beak descends like a guillotine. This was the reality of Antarctica, not a white wasteland of silence, but a noisy, violent, vibrant arena of life and death. A place where monsters ruled the land, the sky, and the sea. How did this frozen desert once support such a terrifyingly abundant ecosystem, and what wiped it all away? Today, we are peeling back 3 miles of ice to reveal the green, bloody heart of the ancient world. To understand the horror and the majesty of what we have lost, we must first shatter the image you hold in your mind.
Astrapotheres,
when you look at a map today, you see white, a blank space at the bottom of the world, a place of death where the cold itself is a weapon. But if we rewind the clock, back past the dawn of humanity, back past the ice ages, we find a contradiction that challenges everything we know about our planet. "50 million years ago, Antarctica was a lush, emerald paradise. It was the beating heart of the southern hemisphere. It wasn't an isolated island of ice. It was a continental hub, a superhighway of life connected to South America and Australia. It was part of the supercontinent Gondwana. Picture a landscape that looks like the temperate rainforests of New Zealand or the Valdivian forests of Chile, but on steroids. We aren't talking about a few scrubby bushes. We are talking about towering Nothofagus trees, southern beaches, creating a canopy so dense it blocked out the sun. Ferns the size of cars covered the forest floor. The temperature, it rarely dropped below freezing. In the summer, it was a balmy 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
Predator of the rainforest locks onto its prey. A sudden rush of power culminates in the swift
This was a land of plenty, but in nature, abundance breeds competition, and competition breeds monsters. This green Antarctica was a petri dish for evolution, allowing species to migrate, settle, and grow to gargantuan proportions. It was a land of opportunity, but the price of entry was the constant struggle to survive. Why was it so warm? The world was different then. Currents flowed differently. Greenhouse gases wrapped the planet in a thermal blanket. But this paradise was built on a fragile foundation, one that would eventually crack. Before the mammals took over, this land saw the end of the greatest dynasty Earth had ever known. We all know the story of the asteroid, the rock that fell from the sky and ended the reign of the dinosaurs. We usually picture this happening in Mexico with the Chicxulub impact, but the shockwaves of that catastrophe rippled all the way to the uttermost south. Even here, thousands of miles from the impact site, the sky turned black. Antarctica, despite its distance, was not spared. The sun vanished behind a curtain of ash and sulfur. The plants, dependent on photosynthesis, began to wither. The dinosaurs that roamed these southern forests looked up to see their world dying. First came the fire, wildfires ignited by falling debris. Then came the tsunamis, tearing apart the coastlines. And finally, the darkness. But here is the twist. The Antarctic dinosaurs were tougher than their northern cousins. They were already adapted to long periods of darkness during the polar winters. They fought hard. We have evidence that some life here held on longer than anywhere else. But the impact winter was ruthless. The global freeze that followed the asteroid blocked the sunlight for years. The mighty titans fell. The forests went silent. It seemed like the end of the world. However, life is stubborn. Nature abhors a vacuum. While the dinosaurs perished, small, scurrying creatures in the undergrowth, our ancestors survived on roots and decaying matter. They waited in the dark, and when the dust settled, Antarctica didn't die. It took a deep breath and prepared for a renaissance. Fast forward into the Paleogene period. The dust has cleared, the dinosaurs are gone, and something incredible happens to the Earth's atmosphere. Carbon dioxide levels skyrocketed. We call this the Eocene thermal maximum. The planet turned into a hothouse. If you think global warming is intense today, imagine a world with no ice caps at all. The sea levels were hundreds of feet higher. Antarctica transformed again. It went from a recovering wasteland to a tropical island. Imagine the smells, the humidity. The air was thick with pollen and spores. It wasn't just a forest, it was a jungle. Palm trees grew in Antarctica. Yes, palm trees. We have found their pollen fossils in the rock. Baobab-like trees stored water in their swollen trunks. This environment created a biological explosion. Without the dinosaurs to keep them in check, the survivors began to change. They grew bigger, they grew stranger. The vegetation was so lush that it could support a biomass density higher than the modern Serengeti. But a lush garden is also a perfect hunting ground. The thick vegetation provided cover for ambush predators. The endless supply of fruit and leaves allowed herbivores to grow massive, which in turn forced the predators to upgrade their weaponry. The arms race of evolution was back on, and Antarctica was the testing ground. In this new world, mammals were rising, but they weren't the kings yet. The throne of the apex predator was claimed by the dinosaurs' closest living relatives, the birds. But these were not the birds you see at your feeder. Enter the Phorusrhacids, the terror birds. Close your eyes and picture a creature standing up to 10 feet tall. It has powerful, muscular legs built for sprinting at speeds of up to 40 miles per hour. It has no wings to fly, it doesn't need them. Its wings are vestigial, ending in hook-like claws used to grapple with struggling prey. But the true horror was its head. The skull was the size of a horse's head, tipped with a hooked beak as hard as stone. These birds didn't peck, they didn't bite, they utilized a hatchet strategy. They would chase down a victim, perhaps a primitive kangaroo or a slow-moving ungulate, and use their neck muscles to drive that beak down like a pickaxe. One strike to the skull, and the prey was dead instantly. They were the lords of the Antarctic forests. Their screeches would have echoed through the valleys, a sound that signaled death was coming. They hunted in packs, coordinating their movements with chilling intelligence. The terror they inflicted on the early mammals was absolute. Every rustle in the bushes, every shadow that moved, could be a terror bird waiting to strike. This was the dominance of the avian dynasty. For millions of years, if you were a mammal in Antarctica, you lived in fear of the skyfallen monsters. While the terror birds ruled by force, the mammals ruled by sheer weirdness and diversity. Antarctica was still connected to South America by a land bridge, what is now the broken chain of islands leading to Tierra del Fuego. This bridge allowed for a great migration. Creatures from the north crossed over, seeking new territories. The animals that settled here were unlike anything alive today. They were evolutionary experiments. Take the Astrapotheres. These beasts looked like a cross between a rhinoceros, a hippo, and an elephant. They had long, low bodies, massive tusks, and likely a short trunk. They were the tanks of the Antarctic forest. They moved through the undergrowth, smashing trees aside, confident in their bulk. But even a tank has soft spots, and the terror birds knew exactly where to strike. Then there were the Leptopterns. Imagine a camel, but give it a trunk like a tapir and three-toed hooves. They roamed in herds, their safety lying in numbers. Their eyes were constantly scanning the fern line for movement. The herd mentality was their only defense. When one panicked, they all ran. A stampede of Leptopterns through the Antarctic jungle would have been a thunderous, chaotic event, crushing anything in its path.
A master of camouflage and speed, navigates the treacherous blue ice fields in a desperate race against the biting wind.
And let's not forget the marsupials. Before Australia became the land of the pouch, Antarctica was their stronghold. Tiny, opossum-like creatures scurried in the canopy, while larger, bear-like marsupials foraged on the ground. They were the opportunists, the survivors, adapting to every niche the ecosystem offered. This was a melting pot of genetics, a laboratory of life where nature threw shapes and sizes against the wall to see what would stick. If the land was a battlefield, the water was a slaughterhouse. The rivers and lakes of this green Antarctica were warm enough to support cold-blooded killers of massive size. Lurking in the murky river deltas were crocodilians, but not just any crocodiles. These were ancient beasts, heavily armored, waiting with infinite patience. Any animal coming to the water's edge to drink was gambling with its life. The sudden explosion of water, the snap of jaws, the death roll, it is a scene that has played out for millions of years. But the true horror lay in the surrounding oceans. The Southern Ocean was a warm, shallow sea teeming with nutrients, and where there is food, there are eaters. Basilosaurus and other primitive whales prowled these waters. These weren't the gentle filter feeders of today. These were serpentine, carnivorous whales with teeth designed to shear flesh and crush bone. They were the size of school buses, moving with a terrifying grace. And sharing the depths with them were sharks of colossal proportions, ancestors of the great white and the megalodon. The ocean was a zone of eat or be eaten. There was no safety. A young whale separating from its mother would be torn apart in minutes. The cruelty of the marine ecosystem was unmatched. It was a place where size mattered, but aggression mattered more. The water was a constant swirl of blood and foam. When we think of penguins, we think of cute, waddling birds in tuxedos. Erase that image. In the Paleogene Antarctica, penguins were formidable. They were warriors. Before the ice took over, penguins didn't need to huddle for warmth. They needed to be big to survive the predators. Enter Anthropotheres, the man-bird. This penguin stood nearly 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. Standing face to face with one, it would look you in the eye. They dominated the coastlines. Their beaks were long, spear-like daggers. They weren't just fishing, they were hunting. Imagine a colony of thousands of 6-foot penguins on a sandy Antarctic beach. The noise would be deafening. The smell, atrocious, but their size was their shield. A lone terror bird might think twice before attacking a phalanx of giant penguins defending their chicks. They were masters of two worlds. On land, they were imposing fortresses of muscle and fat. In the water, they were torpedoes. But even for them, the ocean was dangerous. They had to dive into waters filled with monster sharks and carnivorous whales to feed. Every dive was a calculated risk. Every return to the surface was a victory against death. While the terror birds ruled the ground and the giant penguins ruled the coast, the skis belonged to the Paleontologids. These were the bony-toothed birds. Today, birds don't have teeth, but these creatures evolved jagged, tooth-like projections from their jawbones. They looked prehistoric, menacing, and utterly alien. One genus, Dasornes, had a wingspan of nearly 20 feet. That is the size of a small airplane. They were the albatrosses of the ancient world, but far larger and far scarier. They could glide for days without flapping, riding the thermal currents rising from the warm Antarctic landmass. Imagine looking up and seeing a shadow that blocks out the sun. A creature with a mouth full of bone saws diving into the ocean to snatch up squid or fish. Despite their terrifying appearance, they were fragile. Their bones were hollow and paper-thin to allow for flight. If a storm grounded them, or if a marine predator caught them by a wingtip, they were doomed. They were masters of the air, but helpless against the brute force of the land or sea. They represent the delicate balance of nature, supreme adaptation combined with fatal vulnerability. Nothing lasts forever. The golden age of green Antarctica was living on borrowed time. The engine of destruction was not an asteroid this time. It was the slow, grinding movement of the Earth itself, plate tectonics. South America began to pull away from Antarctica. The land bridge snapped. The Drake Passage opened up. This was the turning point. The opening of this gateway allowed the ocean currents to circle Antarctica without hitting land. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current was born. This current acted like a wall, trapping Antarctica in a swirling vortex of wind and water. It cut the continent off from the warm tropical currents coming from the equator. The heat was shut off. Slowly, imperceptibly, the temperature began to drop. The endless summer ended. The first frost appeared on the fern leaves, then the first snow that didn't melt. The forests began to die. The lush greens turned to brown, then to white. The animals adapted for warmth were confused. The reptiles died first, unable to regulate their body temperature. Then the large herbivores starved as their food source disappeared under the snow. The terror birds, deprived of prey, turned on each other or froze to death. It was a slow, agonizing apocalypse, a genocide by climate. The vibrant jungle was strangled by the ice. The glaciers began to march from the mountains, crushing the forests, burying the history, grinding the bones of the giants into dust. Only the toughest survived. The penguins adapted, shrinking in size and developing thicker blubber. The seals took to the water. The land became a forbidden zone. And so, we arrive at today. Antarctica is a silent tomb. The screaming jungles, the thundering herds, the bloody battles, all of it is buried under miles of ice. But the ghosts are still there. On Seymour Island and the Antarctic Peninsula, scientists brave the freezing winds to chip away at the rock. And the rock speaks. It gives us teeth of giant sharks. It gives us the skulls of terror birds. It gives us the fossilized pollen of palm trees. These fossils are the only witnesses to a world that vanished. They tell us that this frozen wasteland was once the most alive place on Earth. They remind us that our planet is dynamic, violent, and ever-changing. The ice keeps its secrets well, but we are slowly learning the truth. The Antarctica we know, the white, pristine wilderness, is just a temporary mask. Beneath it lies the graveyard of a tropical empire. If you could travel back in time, would you dare to step foot in the Antarctic jungle, knowing a terror bird might be stalking you? And what do you think? Will Antarctica ever be green again in the future of humanity? I want to hear your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the lost world, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Until next time.